All right, welcome back. This is day 4. Today we're going to be talking about everyone's favorite topic, AI. So currently there's only a few main ways on how to buy AI. You have your subscription models, you have your API token models, and then you have local. So I want to go ahead and just talk about each breakdown and when is it appropriate to have a subscription versus when is it worth buying a local machine versus when is it appropriate to use an open aggregator like OpenRouter. So this video will kind of go and show you the 3 different kind of doors that exist and how those doors exist and the current state as of today in July 23rd, 2026, and maybe when you should run to which door depending on your use case. So yeah, let's kind of go into it. I'm going to share a slideshow here. We'll be talking about subscriptions, API aggregators, own hardware, and these are all accurate prices as of today. So I took some screenshots today. So this is what I was explaining earlier. There's 3 doors. There's direct, which is your typical polished apps, best models. People call these frontier models. You have your ChatGPT by OpenAI. You have Claude through Anthropic, and then you have Gemini through Google. There's others. There's Mistral. There's Gemini. There's a few other ones out there, but this is what I would consider the two big ones, right? The ChatGPTs and the Anthropics of the world. However, there's more competition, which makes door 2 and 3 now actually more appealing. However, for the first option, we'll talk about this here shortly. These are your big bad ones that exist out there currently. Then you have your aggregators. This is essentially a collection of models being hosted by people, which you have an API key to access. This allows you to model jump. There's this whole concept of model orchestration that's pretty complicated that's been released. I won't get into any of the technical details, but this is one way you can test and try new models from a wide selection of catalogs. This is usually done through API credits and tokens, and they're typically measured in the millions. So a million tokens might cost you $1.50, for example. And I'll share what that looks like on OpenRouter here shortly. And then finally you have local. Most people don't even know that 2 and 3 even exist. Local is when you host your own hardware, and this has previously been pretty difficult. You would need a pretty significant investment of money. So you need plenty of RAM, you need fast memory. So either you had a bunch of really expensive GPUs, or you had crazy amounts of hardware allocated for this in terms of RAM. With prices are as they currently are, it's very difficult to amass all that hardware at a very reasonable price. However, there are a lot of smaller models that, depending on your use case, can be run locally on your RAM or on even your phone that have gotten really good. There's a whole video I can make on local small models, and I probably will make a video on that later this week. But this area has currently blown up. So most people know about 1, very few people know about 2, and then even less people know about 3. The question really is which is the best, because these all do different things for different people. The question is which one's correct for you in your specific use case. So we'll kind of dive into that here next. So this is door 1. This is live pricing as of today. You can see this is Claude. You have the 0, the 17, and the 100 model. Pricing structure. 0 is free. Essentially, you use chat, talk to the model. You have very limited access, desktop, mobile, and you don't have any ability to use OAuth to use it on your local desktop with your local files. That's where the pro subscription comes in. I've seen this be at 17, I've seen this be at 20. It ranges between there and there. And once you get to this point, you actually unlock Claude Code, Cowork, Design, Science, and a few other tools. This tends to be the sweet spot for most people. I would kind of go against going with the free plan, mainly because the data privacy settings are usually training your data. It's free for a reason. And then the pro model gives you Claude Code and a few other features which are really cool. And then if you find yourself hitting that barrier and you're hitting your limits quickly, then most folks upgrade to Max, and there's actually Max Plus or whatever the plan above that. You'll see here with ChatGPT by OpenAI, similar structure. You have a 0, an 8, a 20, and a 100, and you probably have a 200. I haven't checked the website in a bit. But same exact kind of structure. You get more usage at these higher plans, but you really start unlocking stuff in that 20 tier range. So it's like the same the same style of pricing structure. Both are considered the big two. They are the best models that currently exist. Their parameters are undisclosed in most cases. However, they're claimed to be in the hundreds of billions, trillions. You know, there's a lot of marketing hype, and depending on how you quantize stuff, it all varies. Either way, two big companies. This is door one, which is what most people use. And again, most people don't even get into these higher tiers and the plus and above. They don't pay for the service. And I think that's where most people should be if they're using AI. So you see here, these are the top two. You also have Gemini, Grok, Mistral, and a few others. Same shape, payment structure, just different logo. And now here's where we get some interesting stuff. You have your open weights, the Kimis, the Minimax, the DeepSeek, the Quens. These are far less known. You're also paying for tokens here, so it's not like a subscription where you can sign up and have a fully polished UI. Most of the time, these require some kind of harness or have it be hosted locally, but essentially you're paying for the tokens in the pennies compared to what you would pay for these frontier models cost. And a lot of them you can actually run on your own. Actually, I'm running a Quen model locally, and I can show you that here shortly. And what's crazy is these models now are actually benchmarking at 80% on the SW benchmarks, which is crazy. So that's really good. So for pennies on a dollar, you can be getting the same performance as these on the same benchmarks, which is just crazy. Again, most people know of subscriptions. However, now that more people are using it to code and do agentic tasks and schedule tasks and workspaces and things like that, it's becoming more and more important as people hit those usage limits to know that there are models out there that you can run yourself, or you can pay for through a service like the aggregators that actually have a lot of bang for your buck. Let's take a look here. Sorry, computer notifications. Let me turn those off. All right, so you really have two price tags with this first store. You have a subscription price and you have API cost. In both scenarios, most people are using the subscription cost, and like I said, that $20 sweet spot is what most people are paying for. You get access to Cloud Code, you get access to Codex, and all the additional features and kind of innovative stuff they're coming out with. And their bet is that you're going to eventually hit usage limits, and then you will either pay for tokens because you don't want to upgrade your subscription, or you will upgrade your subscription. So this is the current model of the frontiers, and tokens are just your usage, and the conversion between tokens and credits is a whole mystery and hidden underground thing that no one really wants to talk about. And I can make a whole video on that later too. And then you have door two. Door two is a little bit less known. So OpenRouter is an aggregator. Essentially, there's a few different companies that do this. They take a bunch of models. OpenRouter, I think, has 342. You can set up a single API key, and you have one bill. And essentially, it's like a pay-as-you-go service. So you can pick and choose your models. You typically need some kind of front end, whether it be a locally hosted app that you do, or OpenClaw or Hermes, that you kind of feed the API key and token into. That allows you to leverage OpenRouter's models. You can then pick and choose the model and switch on demand. This is really cool because you only have one bill and you're not locked down to a single provider. So if, God forbid, Opus starts costing 5x of what you previously expected, or your usage gets maxed out with a certain provider and you're locked in, you can't really flip that very easily. However, with OpenRouter, you can make that switch very quickly. One trade-off, of course, is that you now have a middleman, right? So this is what OpenRouter looks like. Obviously, the collection of models is growing every day, and they actually have really cool ranking and leaderboards. You can see some of the top ones here. We have Minimo, we have DeepSeek, we have GLM, we have V4, Minimax. We have a lot of models and a lot of data on those models. You obviously can subscribe to Opus and Sonnet and all the classic models, including the ChatGPT models. So this becomes kind of like a pay-as-you-go thing. However, there is a layer of privacy that's introduced into here. So there is a way to have a ZDR, zero data retention, applied. You can enable this in your settings, and this will essentially give you a toggle that you can apply to the specific model, including the non-frontier models, that essentially has an enhanced level of privacy. However, you're still at the mercy of what OpenRouter does with your actual logs. So you can turn stuff off in OpenRouter, you can apply zero data, and you can be fairly confident that they will not store your data for a period of time. However, there are stuff that is still collected by OpenRouter and still collected by the actual model that you use. So if you want ultimate privacy, OpenRouter does offer some of that. So does the models themselves agreeing to some privacy. However, nothing is guaranteed, and you always should assume that your model data will be eventually leaked. There's been a lot of examples of these frontier models even not being as transparent as they should when it comes to like using your data to being trained. Then we have door 3. Oh yeah, this is what I was mentioning. Most of the aggregators don't have any markup. You're essentially buying, you're getting fees whenever you buy. There are free pools, so what's really cool is a lot of these top ranked models are free. However, there is no training on that data. You're obviously getting a free service. The context models are usually smaller, and it's free for a reason. Usually they're training data based on what you use it for. Again, you have the OpenRouter's privacy policy plus the downstreams provider policy, and again, you can toggle ZDR on OpenRouter and disable a bunch of the configuration settings to make it more private. However, you're still at the mercy of 2 different providers now instead of just one. So either you trust the major providers, which I don't, or you trust OpenRouter and their policy and the downstream providers and their policy. So that's a little bit more complexity in the mix. And again, you can opt out of these free models if you kind of opt out of training. And yeah, these are not going to be your daily chat apps. These are API token usage, so you need some kind of harness. And what I mean by harness is, I mean you need some kind of application, whether it be an open interface inside of your computer, a terminal interface like OpenClaw or Hermes, in order to run these models. And then you have door 3. This is the local hardware component of it. You have different ladders, right? You have 8 gigabytes, 24 gigabytes, 48, and 128. These are the standard kind of sizes of RAM you need. The VRAM, the faster the better. So obviously graphics cards being the best, but 24 gigabyte graphics cards are really expensive. The 3090s, 4090s, those get really expensive really fast. The 40 gigabytes graphic cards are like unheard of because they're like 4 or 5 grand. And then they don't make 128 gigabyte graphics cards. You usually have to daisy chain them together on a server. However, they do have unified memory, something that kind of Apple pioneered. And recently, Strix Halo and a few other chip manufacturers have been able to kind of combine the CPU and GPU into one, giving you access to a ton of memory at a pretty reasonable cost. So you can now run these bigger models locally. So these are kind of the sizes of models you can kind of run on this hardware, and a 70 billion parameter model on 120 gigabytes is totally possible now, which is pretty crazy to say. This would have cost $10,000, $20,000 to build a rig to run this back in the day. Now with these chips coming out that are pretty great, you can run these models pretty comfortably on there, and it's easier to set up than ever. I have a Strix Halo machine on my computer, and I have 128 gigabytes of unified RAM, and I'm able to kind of run this OpenLlama in just a single line. This is kind of like the easiest way you can get started. You can just run a single command and you're up and running in seconds, especially if you're on Linux. Makes it very easy. Essentially, what this kind of boils down to when you're running things locally is you have a model. So you pick your model. Either you have Quinn, Gemma, there's a few really popular ones, and then you have a layer which kind of orchestrates the model. Usually it's Ollama, there's Llama CPP, there's a few other different kind of orchestrators that run the model, and then where you use the model varies. So you can use it on the terminal, you can use it in an interface like an open web UI, which is an open source ChatGPT like experience, or you can plug it into like agentic tools like OpenClaw and Claude Code and a few other models like Hermes. And essentially what this does is allows you to access files locally while running a model that is not connected to the internet at all. You can make it connect to the internet. You can actually feed it like Firecrawl and give it the ability to curl and grab data from the internet. However, it can also run locally without ever communicating to any kind of major provider. So think of this like a movie file in a video player. The brain you download, the model is kind of the brain that you download, and this is kind of what plays the brain, and then you have different ways of watching it. So it's pretty easy to understand that way. I have this running on my machine right now. I have open web UI. It looks like ChatGPT. There's a bunch of really cool features. I can show you what this looks like live. You can see all of these files that I've downloaded. These are all models that I've installed on my computer that are running through Ollama, and then I can pick and choose a model. And then when I type, I can tell it to write me a story. Write me a story. This will it's currently offline. It will spin up, load up the model in my local RAM, and then when it does that, it will start thinking. And bigger is not always better when it comes to these larger models. Sometimes you want speed. So after the initial load of the model onto my local memory, these will be much faster. But you want to have a 120 gigabyte model on a 128 gigabyte machine. Even though you can run it, doesn't mean you should. Typically you want between 30 and 40 kind of tokens per second, and I can kind of dive deep into this in a little bit later. But for now, I'm going to let this run in the background, and I'll come back to this once the model is loaded, and we'll do an actual typing test so you can see the speed in real time once this loads. So when thinking about local LLMs and AI, the truth is you're better off if you're only chatting with like a Claude or Open ChatGPT subscription. A rig like the one I have is going to cost you $2,000 at the very least. These are like used prices for a Ryzen Strict Halo. They've since jumped up to like 4,000, and they're settling down to like 3,500 new in like on Amazon. Seen some on Facebook Marketplace for 2,000, 2,500. So this is like your best case scenario. However, once you do have that configured, all the tokens that you use are free. You can then plug in the ability to search the web and a bunch of other really cool stuff to make it truly free. All you do is you're paying for electricity. However, like I said, the payback time of $2,000 to $4,000 versus $240 over a year is going to be hard to justify, especially as the price of these the price of RAM hardware keeps going up. It's pretty crazy. So this is like a decision chart, but I think I heard this beep, so I think this is up and running now. Yep, it's green. So let me ask it to write me a story. Now that it's up and running, you'll see that it's thinking, and there are different kinds of models. There are some non-thinking models, and there's some that are quicker on coding versus image generation, and so on and so on. There's different speeds depending on different configurations that you can put: less thinking, more context, less context. What's really cool is you can customize all that, and this is a whole rabbit hole on its own that you can dive into. But you can see it's already made a few stories at this point. It's not the fastest thing in the world. I can switch down to a smaller model, and you can see the speed on that one. But I'll let this load here. It took about 34 seconds to provide all this output. And if I go down to like a smaller model like this mini MCV, I use this one quite a bit for just basic like text processing, grammar, things like that. Have it connected to Hermes bot just to use this model. Let this load, and then you'll see this load here. It's a pretty small model, so it's only 7 billion. You here, I'll just have it write me a story. You can see it's already faster. It's able to write a story way quicker. And you saw the load time was pretty quick as well. And both these are loaded, so I can jump from one to another. And eventually after non-usage, this will drop and get off my RAM. See, it's pretty quick. So yeah, this is a quick demo of local model. And this is running through Ollama, through Open Web UI, and then it's rendering it on the browser itself. So yeah, let's get to the meat of it all. What's the best choice for you? If you just need chat, you like typing to it, you like sending it some files, having some basic processing, a chat subscription like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, all those will do you well. The $20 subscription model, you get plenty of bang for your buck, and I'm pretty sure that they're subsidizing at that point. They're actually probably losing money for most. for most power users. I think the average user won't actually hit the limits, but most power users probably use more than $20 worth of tokens at that level. If you are hitting your limits and that's all you still need, obviously you can upgrade to the max tiers and that will do you just fine. If you're doing more local stuff on your computer that requires different kinds of models that do very specific purposes that maybe don't have you handcuffed as much, then you might want to look into API credits either directly through ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini, or an aggregator, right? Or aggregator might provide you some cheaper models like the DeepSeek V4 Pros and the GLMs and things like that. That might your cost per token are way cheaper. So if you look at the top models here, you look at, let's say, V4 versus Anthropic here, you'll see that DeepSeek V4, for example, your input output price is like 43 cents and 87 cents per million. You look at Opus, it's $5 and $25 per million. So this pricing is crazy difference, and DeepSeek V4, for example, has benchmarked really well. So that's just another option, another reason why you might want to look into the aggregators and paying for API credits directly and not doing one of the primary models. If you need unlimited and you're doing these agentic tools, a local lightweight model like a Gemma or a Quencoder or even the ChatGPT OSS might be better for you because you can actually run through millions of tokens 24 hours a day and never have to pay a dime besides your electricity. So that might be an option. If you have a privacy first non-negotiable, which means you want everything to always stay on your system, never leave your system, then you have to build a local model. You have to set up a system where you have enough RAM to run a model of your choosing and your choice, and this becomes complicated very quickly. However, I've seen people actually build really cool local rigs on like Raspberry Pis and a lot of really cool examples, especially like off-grid rigs. Oh, I might want to do that for the channel. Build like a doomsday survival local LLM build. So my personal answer is actually all three. I have a subscription to Claude Code. At the lower tiers, I have a subscription to ChatGPT just because I want to opt out of all the iPhone features, and having kind of a paid plan for your iPhone linking to OpenAI. OpenAI allows you to disable a lot of those features. And on this machine, I have a local system. As you can see, I have a bunch of local models running. I run Hermes on those, and I send stuff to Hermes through Telegram, and that runs all my local models. And then I also actually use the aggregator. I use OpenRouter quite a bit, and I use it to test out models. So whenever a new model comes out that's cheap, I like using it for a week, and I get weekly reports on my usage. And even with some heavy usage on certain weeks, I'm over averaging around $5-10 in that single week power testing these newer models, since a lot of them are cheaper. Obviously, if I'm going to use Claude Code or like Opus or Sonnet or whatever the newest models are, most likely I do it through a subscription model. I wouldn't really want to pay per token on those. And if I am paying per token, I would use an aggregator, and I would choose some of the cheaper tokens out there. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Pick correctly. Stop overthinking about it. This is day 4. My name is Jose. Signing out. Y'all have a good one.